Which guards were underrated but now are well rated and rising up draft boards? Find out next on Locked On NBA Big Board. Welcome into Locked On NBA Big Board. I'm Leif Thulin, joined by James Barlowe. We are talking about some guys that maybe have flown under the radar and now we're starting to get some credit and rising up boards. It's going to be a fun episode because James and I had a discussion after we did a different podcast together about why one of these guards is very similar to one of the guys that's considered in the top 4, but no one's talking about him. So we'll get to that next. But first, I want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any $5 bet that wins. Any winning $5 bet, that's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All righty, James. I teased it a little bit. You and I had a discussion off the air, and we were just talking ball, as people do. And I asked you a question, and I'll just start it the same way I did. I was like, what's the real difference between Isaiah Collier and some of his strengths and what's being talked about for Stephon Castle as his big strengths? I know Castle's bigger, but if you take away height, some of his strengths are the identical ones and some of his weaknesses are identical. So what's the big discrepancy? Because in high school, Collier was the one who was more well-regarded. And I think that's where we should start this because that's a real discussion. Is he flying under the radar?
So the main difference, and it's interesting because I believe team construction, roster construction did play a really big deal. But what's holding Isaiah Collier probably back from cracking that lottery is that his turnover numbers were just really, really, really high at the beginning of the year, and even like throughout the year. He did bring it down. At one point, he was at like four, almost 5 turnovers a game. He ended up finishing with a 1.35 assist to turnover ratio, which is not where you want your point guard to be. But again, if we said, obviously there's a height difference, but we said there's a strong guard, gets downhill, finishes at the rim well, strong frame. The difference obviously is their height. But I think the big difference as far as who's cool and who's not, obviously, Castle played for, the national championship team. So that always helps. Whereas, the USC Trojans didn't make it. And that's not on Collier, all on Collier. He got hurt. Roster construction probably wasn't the best, but I am warming up more to Isaiah Collier. I have him at, I believe, 15 right now. I don't know, man. He maybe has a chance of sneaking into the lottery. It just depends. But, I don't think he's as bad as a shooter as you think he is, or as people think he is. But really, the turnover numbers are just not good, and they're not where you want them to be for a point guard.
Yeah, I mean, he had one of those games, the opening game of the season against Kansas State, which, if I remember correctly, was the very first day of the season. So a lot of eyeballs were on it. It was on TNT. And he hit step back jumpers and he played with patience and could get to the rim wherever he wanted. Had a lot of turnovers, but you were like, okay, I can tell who the NBA player is on this basketball court. Mm-hmm. And there weren't that many of those type of games just in general in the draft, because a lot of these players, especially in the college world, because many are foreign or in the G League, but in the college world, they fit roles on their teams. Collier was a star on his team. He just was an inefficient star who had turnover issues on a team that did not play to his strengths. Like the players that were good on his team, that like Kobe Johnson can't shoot the ball, doesn't space the floor. You had other players. They had 2 big guys. You had Bronny James for part of the season. None of the team could shoot, and Collier was driving into brick walls. And so part of that's decision making, but I also think team construction, as you said. Whereas UConn, yeah, they had another non-shooter in Donovan Clingan, but Castle was maximized in the sense he played the role exactly what Andre Jackson played the year before. Came out like he didn't need the ball, and so people can use that as a strength. Be like, oh, he can play with the ball. I agree, he can, but he was able to be maximized because he could catch in the dunker spot, come off curls, get to the rack, and he would get wide open shots when he had it. Whereas Collier was creating all of his. I'm not saying that Collier's as good as Castle, so don't misinterpret that. But I do think there's a discrepancy that's probably unfair in terms of the discourse around Collier, and in the sense that a lot of his strengths are very similar to Castle strengths, and a lot of Collier's weaknesses are pretty similar to what Castle struggled with. And coming out of high school, I'm a believer high school rankings matter, but they're not an end-all be-all. He was regarded as the better prospect, so maybe there's a gem hiding in plain sight that I've seen on some people's boards as low as 20. I have him, I think, 13 right now, and I think he's going to end up going somewhere between there, like 13 to 17.
Yeah, I agree on 13 to 17. Let me just read off a couple numbers. Surprisingly, catch and shoot, he shot 37%. That's a low number, but when we talk about some of these other guards in this particular draft, like that's on par with where they are guards and wings, really. Off the dribble, he shot 34%. Unguarded, he was at 39%. And really the most encouraging thing for him, even though I don't know how they listed him at 6'5", that's crazy because he ended up being like 6'3". But he was at 60, he shot 61% at the rim. So like you'll take that. That's a strong number. I think I was digging more into his film. I think with NBA spacing, he should be a better decision maker because those lanes will be open with better players, better spacing. But at the same time, I think he is more of a driving kick kind of point guard where he gets downhill and he'll find guys in the corner. He'll always put rim pressure. At the same time, I don't recall, and maybe it was a roster thing as we had talked about before. There weren't too many opportunities for him to throw like pocket passes or skid passes in pick and roll. But like, I think that he has talent. I think that, again, you said 13 to 17 range is probably about where you think that's where you put him at. I have him at 15. I think in the right situation, he could be a starter eventually. He could end up being, if the jump shot is just okay, and Eric Bledsoe type. But one thing he should do from day one is he should be like picking up full court, defending at a high level when he does get the opportunity, because he just has like brute strength that you just can't like teach at the point guard position. Should be able to guard two positions, really.
Yeah. And he's strong, like you said, but he's also laterally quick. It's kind of a rare breed of like a lateral strength and kind of a stocky build, even though he tested pretty tall. You alluded to him putting pressure on the rim. That's evidenced by 5.8 free throw attempts per game. That's pretty good. That's a big deal in college to get there that frequently in clogged lanes. To shoot 6 free throws a game is a good thing. Shot about 34% from three, which is better than I actually remembered it being. And I don't think he's a good shooter because of 34%, but I do think he's what I would call a rhythm shooter. And if those of you who played basketball are listening, you know what I mean, where some players that like to drive are the type that if they can kind of stomp, put a power dribble down and get their feet in, set their feet off a dribble, they shoot it better than if they catch it on a standstill. Whereas there are some players that are completely the opposite, that they have to catch and shoot it. And so I think he's one of those guys that with NBA spacing, he will have to learn to shoot because people will short close him, but he can also step in and shoot mid-range jump shots and probably shoot off the bounce around screen should people go under his screen. Do you think he's a point guard at the next level, though? I assume you do.
Yeah, I think he's a point guard at the next level. He will need to clean up his shot selection, in particular from the arc on, or I guess inside the 3-point line. Sometimes I think he needs to shoot a floater. Sometimes I think he just got to the rim too much. Sometimes he may need to get like a little pull-up jumper from, I guess you could say, right below the foul line. But I think he has a chance. Again, tighten up the playmaking, and I feel like in the right situation, he could be. I wouldn't want to say the steal of the draft, but again, if we look at this draft 3 years from now, he could be a top 10 player in this particular draft. And again, we've talked about how wide open it is, but like he has the talent to do so. But there's just a few things I think he needs to like really, really tighten up.
I'm with you. Well, coming up next, we're going to talk about another guard who it has similar measurements in terms of height and maybe even build to a degree, but a very different game, who also is rising up draft boards and kind of coming out of nowhere, but he shouldn't have because he burst on the scene with a triple-double in his very first game. So coming up next, we're going to talk about Carlton Bub Carrington. But first, let me tell you about FanDuel. All righty. Well, FanDuel, You heard it at the outset, so pardon me for beating a dead horse, but this is need to know information. Summertime means baseball. The NBA Finals just concluded, and there's Olympics and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel right now. The new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. That's $200 that you can use to bet everything from who's going to hit a home run and will it go out of the park? Could it be my guy Rafael Devers, who earlier this year hit home runs 6 days in a row? Could he blast another one out of Fenway? Might as well bet on it, especially with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Welcome back to Locked On NBA Big Board. I got one more question for you guys. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the best and biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back into Locked On NBA Big Board. I'm Leif Thulin. I'm joined by James Barlowe, and this is a guy I think we're both pretty high on that has game. He's one of those guys that I like to watch because you know he's going to be the focal point of the offense when he was at Pittsburgh. You know he's going to have the ball in his hands and try to score, but you can't stop him from scoring. You can't stop him from finding other teammates, and he makes the right reads, and he also rebounds the basketball. That's Carlton Carrington, and he's a guy that people had concerns about his shot. People had concerns about his physical speed or strength, but he goes to the combine and shot better than just about everyone, especially off the dribble, which is his forte. So break down the game of a guy that I don't think enough people know how good he is because he's just not that mainstream name. But I think he's one of those guys that'll be like Josh Primo, came out of nowhere, was picked in the lottery. I'm starting to think he gets picked at 12 to 16, kind of similar range to Collier.
So I need to move him up. Let me tell you a quick story. All right. So Bub got off to a smoking hot start. And I told my brother, I was like, yo, we got to watch this kid from Pittsburgh. So I told him, I was like, man, he looks like a bona fide top 10 pick. And then his shooting just went down, like tremendously. He had a rough stretch. Some people say Pitt didn't have the strongest early conference schedule, whatever. But so ACC play rolls around and, he struggles and then he picks it up like a lot. So his numbers, his shooting splits are kind of everywhere. He reminds me not of De'Aaron Fox because that is like a disrespected to their athleticism, right? Not to say that Bub isn't an athlete, but he's not De'Aaron Fox. But De'Aaron Fox, in my opinion, at Kentucky, he took the jumpers that he needed to take. He took the shots that would absolutely translate at the next level. He just didn't make them at the efficiency that you wanted him to make them. So when he did get to the NBA, the jump shot improved over the course of his rookie year, sophomore year. And now you see that he's a 3-level scorer. And the same shots, in particular, those mid-range, those pull-ups, he was taking those shots. He just didn't make them. Let's bring it back to Bub. I think Bub takes the correct jumpers, shots. His shot selection is very good in pick and roll. You mentioned that at the combine, he was unreal off the dribble. On the season, he shot 41% off the dribble, and like the majority of his jump shots are off the dribble. So like in pick and roll, he's dynamic. I feel like he puts defenders in jail. He keeps guys on his hip. I think he's 6'5", and he's not a skinny 6'5". He's got some bricks in his back pocket, so he uses that to his size advantage. And he's just got a really, really good like in-between game. And I feel like at the point guard position, unless you're like Steph, Dame, like you need to have that pull-up game because when the defender goes over the top of the screen and that big is in super deep drop, that 15-foot shot is going to be there. Chris Paul is still playing today because he can get that shot basically, when he wants to. But I really, really like Bub Carrington. We mentioned Collier in the first segment as far as like taking care of ball. Bub is at a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. And that is not with the fanfare of guys that he had, or I guess you could say USC had on paper. Now, again, I like Blake Hinton. I think Blake Hinton is going to be a G League star, and when he does get his opportunity to play, he's going to play well. But like Bub, he makes the plays, he hits the roll, man, he hits skip passes, he hits your pop guy. Like he can really, really play. My biggest concern, I think he's a better shooter than numbers show, and I'm getting long-winded, but he just has to get better at the rim. I think he shot 51% at the rim. And for somebody to be 6'4", 6'5", his at the rim game like really, really needs to improve for him to be like that point guard that has the potential that he does have.
But I think that's more fixable than like a bad jump shot, though.
Yes.
And so that's why it gives me hope. I mean, if you look at, so like you said, he burst on the scene with 18, 12, and 10. His last 5 games, he played 3 games where he had 23, 24, and 27, I want to say. And those are against good competition. That's an ACC tournament play.
North Carolina, Wake Forest. Yeah.
And BC, I want to say.
Yeah.
And so he played those teams when Pittsburgh desperately needed a win and played really, really well. And then you watch him at the Combine. The Combine, to me, is not necessarily it doesn't tell you, hey, this is going to be the most important thing ever. But what it does tell you is if a guy whose percentages aren't particularly good shoots it really well there, and it's like really well, it's not just, oh, he shot pretty well, then they can shoot. It's just like you have to look at the context. Well, I watch a lot of college basketball, so I knew he was taking difficult shots at Pittsburgh as the focal point of the offense. A guy that I knew could shoot that shot poorly last year was Keontae George. Keontae George shot poorly at Baylor, and then he comes into the Combine and had the best pro day of anyone. And he goes in the NBA and he shines. He's a second-team all-rookie. So the reason I have faith in Bub Carrington is twofold. He's young, and he was dominant in his role. You don't see players that come in that well in their role in college at a starring role really fail in the NBA. Like they may not be stars at the same level they were in college, but they tend to find a niche in the NBA, and they tend to find success. And if a guy can score as well as he scored 14 a game, but like I said, he could score north of 20 pretty regularly, they're going to be able to run a second unit, score the ball, shoot open shots, because the game's going to come so much easier to them in time in the NBA versus what it was in college, having to struggle being scouted against every single game as the top option. So he's a guy that I think is going to rise, is going to kill workouts because he's going to shoot the ball well, show off his size. He's got a 6'8" wingspan. And if his biggest deficiency is he's not very good at the rim, or he's not that great of an athlete defensively, well, he's got size to compensate and guard 2 positions. Even if he's not great at it, size is more valuable than the ability to shuffle the feet adequately. Like you have to really be excellent at shuffling your feet if you're diminutive to compensate for that lack of 4 inches of height and 8 inches of wingspan. So he'll be adequate on that end in terms of the guards that you expect to be adequate. And then he's going to shoot better than he did in college. And I think he can run an offense because he was able to put up triple doubles. So I think you're looking at a probable lottery pick.
I have a question for you that I'm going to save for you for the third segment. But like you mentioned, Bub is 18. He's the youngest player in this draft, if not the youngest. And the interview came out online, and I think his father asked him, I think his father was trying to get him to reclassify. And he was like, no, what for? Like, I'm ready. Like, this is what I've waited my whole life for. Like, leave me in this grade. I'm in this grade. I'm ready to go. And like, yeah, it's an interview, but like that was a question, they asked him, and that wasn't like something like his agent like fed him. Like he was like, no, like I'm ready. Like I want to play. And like stuff like that, like that means a lot to me, because that sounds like a kid that's just, he's ready for it. Like you trust his work ethic. He's not leaning into an excuse. And you know how the way that college basketball, high school, even middle school, like, kids are being held back for rankings and whatnot. And for him to go in and be like, you know what, I'm ready, I'm here. He chose a situation that was going to work best for him. I had mentioned before, he played on a loaded AAU team that featured Trenton Flowers and I believe Kwame Evans. That's his name, yeah, for Oregon. He was a third guy on that team, and he's probably going to end up being the best pro. And he was the lowest rated of the 3. So I'm a big Carlton Carrington fan.
Well, one last thought on him that I've got is I was trying to think of players that came in as freshmen and were as productive as he was in the ACC. as guards. And the furthest, I mean, I could probably get a little further if I thought harder. But as you're talking, I thought of Cole Anthony for some reason. They're totally different players.
Mhm.
But Cole Anthony was not on a particularly good team. North Carolina missed the tournament. His efficiency wasn't very good. But somehow I always had faith this guy would end up being a top 20 pick. I think Cole Anthony went 15th, and he's been a solid pro. I think despite them being different players, Cole Anthony more of a turbo athlete and a two guard. Carlton Carrington has the more desirable like NBA skill set, in my opinion, because he's a point guard at that size, and he's not as reliant on athleticism. And his shot is the thing he needs to improve, but he shot 79% from the free throw line, can shoot the ball in the combine. And Cole Anthony is a success story in terms of those molds. Like you could look at a few others, and they're pretty successful of guys that you kind of overthink because their efficiency is not great on bad teams. And ACC is hard to thrive as a freshman. There's not too many who have. So I would say Carlton Carrington's one stock is moving up, but also should be moving up. It's not just a here's the smoke, take this right here. Well, coming up next, we're gonna talk about a few more guys that are moving up. They don't have to be necessarily guards. These two are the ones we wanted to highlight, but James and I tend to think pretty similarly and maybe hear similar things. But we're going to try to tell you guys some guys that should be moving up and if they are. But first, let me tell you guys about eBay Motors. eBay Motors, passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All righty. Well, welcome back. Leif, Thulin, and James Barlowe here. We talked about Isaiah Collier, who's moving up. We talked about Bub Carrington, who was moving up. Who's next that you think stock is starting to soar and appropriately so?
Before we get into that, Leif, I'm gonna put you on the hot seat.
Okay.
Me and Leif, we like this, right? Leif is not afraid to go against the grain. If Leif likes you, Leif loves you. And so, Leif, in your mind, actually, you know what? Tell me why a Nikola Topic is a better point guard prospect than Bub Carrington.
See, the reason I would say he is assuming his knee comes back fully healthy,
Yes.
is that his rim finishing is a threat, and he uses his height better than Carrington does. And while I think Carrington's a better shooter, and I think it's closer than the typical rankings would say, I think he uses uses the ability to penetrate to facilitate for more players than what Carrington does, being so heliocentric at Pittsburgh. What Topic did is he got into the paint using kind of craftiness, not top end speed. Even though he's a deficient shooter, in my opinion, he'd get in there and use craftiness and a little bit of athleticism to score with either hand. He's pretty good with either hand, but he also makes the appropriate split second read. Whereas I think Carlton Carrington may have more room to grow in that, but like I can't project it 1,000%. His decision making was more, hey, I've got the ball in my hands quite a bit. I'm coming off pick and rolls. The defense is here, and he has more time to survey. And then his individual talent being the best on Pittsburgh created for his teammates, in my assessment. I don't think that's a crazy question. And I'll take it a step further, and I know I'm going to get blasted for this one. I don't think, like Reed Sheppard is in a lot of people's top 5, right? Reed Sheppard's lower than that for me. I'm working on a board to officially slot him. But if you were to play point guard versus point guard, I think Carlton Carrington is the better point guard than Reed Sheppard.
I wouldn't argue with that. I think Carlton's obviously he's bigger. I mean, Reed is a better shooter, but if I need somebody to run my team, I would want Carrington over Reed Sheppard. I think Reed is going to be a great backcourt mate, co-star, but I don't think he's going to be your lead guard. and I don't think he's going to be your table setter. But pairing him next to another guard, preferably a big one, like again, I have him 6 to Charlotte. I think he works well with LaMelo. Maybe he works. I think he works well with Cade Cunningham in Detroit. But if you put him in a situation where, and it wouldn't happen, but let's say Washington liked him at 1, I don't think that would work. Or at 2, excuse me. I don't think that would work out in his favor, because then you're asking him to do more than what I feel like he is capable of doing. So, but I'm not mad at that one either. So, hey.
I mean, I don't think, okay, I'll take this a step further. I mean, I truly believe this is not for people to engage with, but engage with it if you will. I don't think that Reed Sheppard, if you're projecting him to be a codependent player, should be a top 10 pick. Like, the only way you're a top 10 pick to me, in terms of the way I draft, which is I tend to favor upside, but even in this draft where I have a little more leniency towards drafting safely, would be if you really believe he's your point guard of the future. So even if in Charlotte, it's a unique case because he wouldn't be the point guard, but LaMelo's got like small forward size.
Yes.
But aside from that, I still wouldn't make that pick personally, because I don't necessarily want a starting shooting guard that's 6'1" and not very good defensively next to LaMelo, who is terrible defensively by choice. He could be a good defender, but he's just not by choice. But my greater take is, regardless of fit, if you're not the point guard and you're 6'1", you leave your team at a deficiency on defense. And the only exception to this is like Javon Carter or Davion Mitchell. Well, they're deficient offensively. And so I really don't see the upside and the return that people are saying, because I know he can shoot 51%. But you know how many threes Reed Sheppard shot off of screens at Kentucky?
How many?
4. He shot 4 threes off of screens. He didn't shoot many off the dribble either. And the point guard at the time is slipping down the draft board, and Rob Dillingham. And I don't understand why, because a lot of the reason that Reed Sheppard had such great looks was because of Dillingham. And Sheppard is a fantastic shooter. I'm not trying to take anything away from that. But it's just a completely different world to me to be playing point guard at the next level and not having done it before, not really ran many pick and rolls, doesn't shoot off the dribble that often, doesn't have the elite burst to change directions. So if someone who's ran a ton of pick and roll has played in a heliocentric role and it gets minimized and easier for him, and Bub Carrington, I'd rather have him running my second unit or be a starter.
Leif has spoken. I'm not going to argue with you.
All right, so enough about that debate. But who is rising up the board here? That was our initial plan, but you never know where we're going to go. Not scripted with us. But I don't know who's rising anymore, because I've kind of felt like I've got my board set in place and just tinkering a little bit here and there. But who's rising up your board or your mock drafts?
So I'm going to. He's not rising up my board because I'm hammering the table. I'm Jaylon Tyson, man. I'm all in. I think he's as good. I think he gives you the perfect. He's 21, right? I think in this draft, when you want safety, if you want safety and combination with upside, maybe he doesn't have a lot of upside, but he's not a 23-year-old Dalton Connect. I think he's a better player than Dalton Connect. I think he does everything just as well. I think he's going to give you better playmaking. I think he's going to give you more off the dribble. I think he can be a scorer. I think he can be a 16, 18 point per game scorer and create his own shot at the next level. I feel like I'm alone there. I've seen him mocked late. Some people have him 29 to Utah. I can't see him falling that far because, again, he's 6'7". He can put the ball on the ground. He can catch and shoot. Like, he's extremely talented. I think people are overthinking it. So he's firmly. I'm good. I'm taking him over some of these young guys on the wing because I know what he is and I know that he can score. We mentioned it before, but Isaiah Crawford, I know that some people have him as a second-round pick. I think he's a first-round pick. I know he has some lingering knee issues, but again, he's 21. He looks like the son of OG Anunoby. And again, if we're saying we need some upside, we need defense, we need guys that can make shots, I think he checks all of those boxes, and he's extremely young. Again, we just need those knees to be healthy.
I'm with you. I like him as well. I actually was on a Kings podcast today, Locked on Kings, and I mentioned him as the 13th pick as a real possibility that I
I
preferred
said
him.
Crawford or Tyson?
Tyson, sorry, that is. And I'm with you on both of them, I guess is what I meant to say. And then as for Crawford, I've been talking about him as a possibility for the Jazz at 29. And I'm right there with you. One last guy that I know is starting to move up boards. It's a lesser known player who had a good week at the G League. Or excuse me, he did have a good week at the G League camp, but also at the NBA Combine is Enrique Freeman. He went to Akron, little known player. I think he's going to play the 4. It's about 6'7". He's got long arms, a little bit of funky jump shot, but really great touch. The ball shoots high, nice soft touch. I've seen some rumors talking about him moving up the board. So just a player that it's not always the first round that guys that are moving up because not many people know who he is unless you're really in this world. Then and he may be coming at the end of the first round, which is something that no one would have really expected. So
no one.
Yeah, I think it's worth monitoring because there's always guys at the end of the first that you're like, oh, that's interesting. Well, I think he could be one of those to people who casually follow the draft. He could be like those, hey, who the heck is that guy? Well, if you listen here, I don't be too surprised if he goes between 25 and 35.
Another one that which is funny. My brother, shout out to my brother Ra, he told me that don't be surprised how high AJ Johnson goes when he goes in this draft. Like he's an upside guy. And
do you like him? I was torn. I saw him at the combine. You could see the athleticism, like he had a poster dunk, but I didn't feel like he impacted the game. So, what do you like him? And then if you also are like me and a little hesitant, what's the pitch for those that do like him?
All right, so I told Rich this on a podcast before. I think he wasn't hip to AJ Johnson. I was like, look, his numbers are terrible, right? And if you watch his film, like some of his film is really, really bad. And then there's some of his film, you'd be like, man, this kid is really, really good. So it's like, I get it. If you're not aware, he is probably 3 years away from having a chance of playing. But I think he measured at like 6'5". He's rail thin. He looks like he's about 15 years old, but 6'5" guys that can handle, that do show some court vision. I think he's a good athlete. They get an opportunity. So, but he's the ultimate upside guy. He's the one where you take him at like 32, 33, and everything works out. You get some food in his system, a weight room, some good veterans. He could be really, really good, but he has a ways to go.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think if he enters the NBA, he will be the skinniest player in the NBA.
he's going straight to the G League. He's gonna spend he should spend the majority of the year in the G League, and that's not a knock. It's just physically he's just not ready at all.
Yeah, I mean he is thin as a rail. Like that is no knock on him, but it would be very impressive to see him defend some of these grown men in the NBA or the G League. Well, that'll do it for Locked on NBA Big Board. It's been a pleasure as always telling you guys about some of the risers of the draft. Stay with us for another great episode tomorrow. And if you guys make this your first listen, we certainly appreciate it. But with your next listen, check out Locked on NBA, recapping the NBA Finals. The Celtics won it all. What's next for your team? Are there trades in the makings that only Locked On hosts are hip to? So let's make sure to check that out. But also, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Well, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it as always. Stay tuned for the next episode, and you never know what you're going to get. And let us know what you think of our takes, whether they're hot or cold. And I'm excited to see because there were some bold ones said today. So thank you guys.